Hi, my name's Maddie. I'm chatting today with Sofia Patel, an analyst within our international team. Sofia recently wrote a report entitled The Sultanate of Women that looks at the roles of females in perpetrating and preventing violent extremism. So thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks.
Before we get down to some of my more specific questions, I was wondering if you could sort of quickly summarise the first half of your report, specifically in relation to what ISIS says and thinks about women.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So the first half of the paper is divided into three parts. The first bit is an overview of women in violent extremism. The second bit looks at the differences within Salafi doctrine and their approach to women in jihad. And the third bit looks specifically at Islamic State and the approaches that they have towards women in jihad. So honing in on that, Islamic State has very contradictory roles, that they ascribe contradictory roles to women. At the most basic level, they at once revere and they degrade women, and their narrative is one of empowerment of women, but once in the caliphate, they are subjected to patriarchal and misogynistic structures.
So one of the things that you spoke about quite a bit in the report was this sort of difference, this distinction between disengagement and deradicalisation. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and just essentially why you think it's important that we distinguish between these two ideas.
Sure. So disengagement, I would argue, deals with the symptoms of the problem, whereas deradicalisation goes right to the root of an individual's belief system. So basically, I would argue that the end point is the difference between them. What you want to achieve. So in order to set realistic goals and develop practical solutions, I would argue that CVE structures need to assess which avenue they want to go down and to only tackle one at a time.
Interesting. And what do you think are the main differences between creating counter-narratives using former radicals versus using individuals who haven't been attracted thus far to this violent extremist propaganda?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's something that I do suggest in the paper, and it's something that hasn't really had a lot of research put into it, because as we all know, former extremists have been employed across the world internationally to develop counter-narratives and provide solutions. Former extremists provide legitimacy to programs. They are credible as individuals. They've been there, they've done that, they've experienced the same things. So people who have never been attracted to violent extremism, it seems odd to suggest maybe that they might have something to say, but I would say that the majority of Muslims have never been interested in violent extremism. They've never been attracted to any kind of radicalisation. So from a resourcing point of view, they are everywhere, and it wouldn't be difficult to find a bunch of engaged, interested Muslim adolescents, young adults to talk about their positive experiences and to hopefully perhaps channel that into some sort of counter-narrative that might try to change the conversation from one that's marred with negativity into something that celebrates positivity.
Another point that you mentioned quite a bit in the report is the fact that some parents are not as well equipped to recognise and deal with the signs of radicalisation within their own children. I'd love to hear why you think that's so. Like, do you think, for example, it's because of the sheer speed that kids are being radicalised nowadays, or why do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, parents at the best of times have difficulty in understanding what their children are doing, what they're getting up to, who they're speaking to, let alone with the added issue of radicalisation to deal with. It's very hard, and it's something that policymakers and governments and experts are continuously trying to work out what the best approach is and who is best placed to notice signs of radicalisation. What are those signs of radicalisation? You know, each person is different. There is no one indicating factor. You know, you can't just say, oh, you know, someone changed their dress sense and, you know, therefore that's an indicating factor. On the flip side, you know, you mentioned, is it to do with the speed of radicalisation? Well, I don't think it is necessarily a speed factor. I think it's mostly to do with issues with communication, with technology, with sort of generational gaps and these kinds of things. Radicalisation at this contemporary phenomenon that we're experiencing is very time specific, and it's very reactive to the technology developments that we're experiencing. There is obviously a generational gap. There is definitely room to better educate families, parents, siblings, to understand, the different types of platforms that are available online, the different types of messaging services, encryption, incognito, these kinds of things that, allow messages and conversations to be carried out anywhere and everywhere, and can be are totally unknown to anybody else.
So my final question, I'd like to bring it back to Trump and his recent immigration ban against 7 Muslim majority nations. What effect do you think such a ban could have specifically on Muslim women?
Yeah, very topical. Looking at the effects of similar sorts of crude policies that have been enacted, such as France's burkini ban last summer, which directly impacted Muslim women. So you're right. I do believe that such a policy will directly impact ISIS's recruiting strategy, and it feeds into the narrative of victimhood because it directly feeds into sentiments of injustice, betrayal, marginalization, cultural isolation. All of those sentiments are push factors towards recruiting individuals towards a radical organization. Muslim women specifically, I don't think they will have any kind of reaction that's different to men. All I would say is that such crude policies make it very difficult for counterterrorism structures to be achieved, long-lasting counterterrorism structures to be achieved. And as we saw in the wake of the Nice attack last summer, France's burkini ban, as a response to that, was received extremely negatively, and it didn't do anything to help issues of national security.
Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today, Sofia.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So the report, The Sultanate of Women, is available now on the ASPI website, and you can also follow the links below. Thanks.